The sleek observation vessel silently pierced Earth's atmosphere, its advanced cloaking systems making it invisible to human detection. Inside, Lyra adjusted her monitoring equipment while reviewing her mission parameters. Her iridescent scales shimmered under the soft blue lighting of her ship's cabin as she prepared for what she assumed would be a mundane assignment. As the youngest sinologist from the Bright Star Academy, Lyra had earned this mission through her brilliant analysis of developing civilizations. However, her superiors had sent her to Earth almost as an afterthought. A simple task to document what they considered an unremarkable species' primitive military capabilities. The ship's AI positioned itself above a military testing facility in a remote desert location. Lyra's people had mastered energy-based weapons centuries ago, and the thought of studying chemical propellant-based weapons seemed almost laughable to her. Still, she had to complete her assignment. Through her high-resolution scanners, she observed the facility below. Humans in uniform moved about their duties, transporting what her sensors identified as metal-based projectile weapons. "How quaint," she muttered, typing notes into her datapad. "They're still using solid ammunition after all these years." The testing facility sprawled across the desert landscape, featuring multiple firing ranges, vehicle testing areas, and what appeared to be underground bunkers. Lyra's attention was drawn to a group of soldiers gathering at one of the larger ranges. They were unloading various weapons from their transport vehicles. "Computer, enhance visual on Sector 4, she commanded. The ship's AI complied, providing a crystal-clear view of the soldiers preparing their equipment. Lyra noticed something odd. These humans didn't seem to handle their weapons with the reluctant necessity she'd observed in other developing species. Instead, they showed a strange pride and confidence in their arms. One soldier in particular caught her attention. He moved with the assurance of someone who thoroughly understood his tools. The name tape on his uniform read Miller, and the insignia marked him as a captain. He was instructing others, pointing out features on various weapons with enthusiasm. Lyra's curiosity grew as she watched them set up their firing positions. Her people had long assumed that any species would naturally progress toward energy-based weapons, abandoning physical projectiles as soon as possible. Yet here were these humans, clearly capable of advanced engineering given their space programs and nuclear technology, still devoted to perfecting what she considered obsolete technology. She activated her atmospheric sensors, collecting data on local conditions. The desert air was hot and dry, filled with fine sand particles, conditions that would play havoc with many of her people's energy weapon systems. Yet the humans' weapons seemed unaffected. "Interesting," she noted in her log. Environmental resilience might be a factor worth investigating. It was her first admission that these primitive weapons might have any advantages worth noting. As she continued her observation, Lyra caught herself leaning forward in her seat, genuinely intrigued by the testing preparations below. The humans were arranging an impressive array of weapons, from small handheld devices to larger mounted guns. Each seemed to serve a specific purpose, showing a level of specialization she hadn't expected. Perhaps, she thought, there's more to learn here than just documenting their technological inadequacies. The thought surprised her. It went against everything she'd been taught about the natural progression of weapons technology. Making a decision that would change both her life and potentially the relationship between their species, Lyra began composing a request to her superiors. She wanted permission to reveal herself to the humans and learn directly from them about their weapons technology. After all, she reasoned in her message, if we're to understand why they persist with these methods, we should learn from the source. She knew it was an unusual request. Direct contact with developing civilizations was rarely approved, but something about these humans and their dedication to perfecting supposedly obsolete technology demanded closer investigation. As she waited for a response, Lyra continued watching Captain Miller and his team, unaware that her assumptions about primitive weapons were about to be dramatically challenged. 3 days had passed since Lyra sent her request. To her surprise, permission arrived quickly, with her superiors curious about her initial observations. They cautioned her to maintain technological superiority during any interaction, standard protocol when dealing with less advanced species. The morning sun beat down on the testing range as Captain Miller addressed his team. Through her directional microphones, Lyra could hear him clearly. Today we're evaluating the new XM-45 modular system against current field standards, Miller announced. Command wants comprehensive data, so we'll test in all conditions. Lyra checked her translation device one last time. She had studied human languages, but the technical terminology might be challenging. With a deep breath, she activated her ship's descent sequence. The small craft lowered itself into a clearing about 50 meters from the soldiers. As the cloaking field dissolved, revealing the sleek metallic vessel, the reaction was immediate. Weapons were raised, orders shouted, and a defensive perimeter formed with impressive speed. Efficient response time, Lyra noted mentally, impressed despite herself. These humans weren't the bumbling primitives her textbooks had described. She emerged from her ship, hands raised in the universal gesture of peace. Her appearance, humanoid but with iridescent scales and large reflective eyes, caused visible shock among the soldiers. "I come with peaceful intentions," she called out, her translator converting her native clicks and whistles into English. "I am Lyra, Sinologist from the Stellar Commonwealth. I wish to observe your weapons technology." Captain Miller stepped forward cautiously, his weapon lowered but ready. "This is a restricted military facility. Identify how you bypassed our airspace security. Your detection systems are rudimentary compared to our cloaking technology." Lyra replied with unintended condescension. "I've been observing your tests for several days." This revelation caused concerned murmurs among the soldiers. Miller's expression hardened. "And what exactly interests an advanced alien civilization about our weapons?" he asked. Lyra smiled, excited to share her knowledge. "My species studies developing civilizations. We're particularly interested in technological progression paths. Your continued reliance on projectile weapons is unusual." Something flashed in Miller's eyes. Perhaps pride, perhaps irritation. Unusual how? Most civilizations abandon solid projectiles once they discover energy-based alternatives, she explained, activating a holographic display from her wrist device. "They're clearly superior." To demonstrate, she projected an image of her people's standard sidearm. This converts ambient energy into focused plasma bursts. Clean, efficient, no ammunition needed. Miller studied the projection with genuine interest. "Impressive range. 500 of your meters with perfect accuracy," Lyra replied proudly, "and it never needs reloading." Miller exchanged glances with his second-in-command, a stocky woman whose name badge read Tanner. "Would you be willing to demonstrate?" Miller asked. Lyra hesitated. Sharing technology with developing species violated protocol, but a simple demonstration seemed harmless. "I could show you basic functionality." Miller nodded, then spoke into his radio. Command apparently gave approval, because he soon gestured toward the firing range. "We were about to begin our own tests. Perhaps you'd join us for a comparison." Walking alongside the humans toward the range, Lyra felt a mixture of excitement and superiority. Finally, she could show these humans how primitive their weapons truly were. At the range, targets had been set up at various distances. Miller demonstrated their first weapon, a standard rifle. The explosive crack as it fired made Lyra flinch. How barbaric to use chemical explosions to propel metal. The bullet hit the target's center mass. "Effective, but noisy and inefficient," Lyra commented. "The energy waste is enormous." Miller nodded politely. "Your turn." Lyra removed her sidearm, a sleek device that hummed softly as it activated. With practiced ease, she aimed and fired. A brilliant blue energy bolt struck the target, leaving a perfectly cauterized hole. No recoil, adjustable intensity, and perfectly silent operation mode if needed, she explained proudly. Instead of the awe she expected, Miller and his team studied her weapon with professional curiosity rather than envy. "Interesting," Miller said. But now let's show you what we've been working on. I think you might find our primitive approach has some advantages you haven't considered." Something in his confident smile made Lyra suddenly wonder if her assessment of human weaponry might have been premature. The desert sun climbed higher as Miller led Lyra to a large covered area, where several tables displayed an array of human weapons. Soldiers worked efficiently, arranging everything from small handheld pistols to larger mounted systems. The organization impressed Lyra, despite her assumption that the technology itself would prove inferior. "Before we continue with live demonstrations, I'd like to explain our approach," Miller said, gesturing to the weapons. "I suspect our paths diverged for practical reasons, not because we couldn't develop energy weapons." Lyra tilted her head skeptically. "All spacefaring civilizations eventually abandon projectile weapons. It's a natural evolution." Miller picked up a standard rifle. "This M4 carbine has been in service for decades. Simple, reliable, effective. But I understand your perspective. It must seem outdated. The energy inefficiency alone is staggering." Lyra couldn't help but comment. "Converting chemical energy to kinetic force wastes at least 70% of potential energy." Miller nodded patiently. "True, but sometimes efficiency isn't the only consideration." He handed the rifle to Sergeant Tanner and picked up what appeared to be a more advanced weapon. "This is our newer XM45 system. Still fires physical projectiles, but with significant improvements." Lyra examined it with mild curiosity. The weapon featured multiple attachments and a sophisticated targeting system. "You've enhanced the basic design, but it's still fundamentally limited by its mechanical nature." "Perhaps," Miller said with a slight smile. "Lieutenant Reed, please set up the environmental testing chamber." Reed nodded and began activating a large transparent enclosure at the far end of the range. Inside, Lyra could see targets at various distances. "What we'd like to propose," Miller continued, "is a comparative test under different environmental conditions. Would you be willing to participate?" Lyra straightened, confident in her technology's superiority. "Certainly. My weapon will outperform yours in any scenario." "Excellent." Miller's expression remained neutral, but Lyra detected something, anticipation, perhaps, in his eyes. "We've prepared 5 testing conditions that reflect real-world combat environments." Lieutenant Reed explained as she adjusted controls. "First, standard atmosphere, then heavy precipitation, extreme cold, electromagnetic disturbance, and finally a dust storm simulation." Lyra hesitated momentarily. Some of these conditions could interfere with her weapon's energy calibration, but she remained confident. "Proceed." Miller gestured formally. "As our guest, you should go first." Stepping to the firing position, Lyra activated her sidearm. The weapon hummed to life, its internal diagnostics confirming optimal functionality. The first target appeared, a standard humanoid silhouette 100 meters distant. She fired 3 times in rapid succession. 3 perfect holes appeared in the target's center mass. "Impressive accuracy," Miller acknowledged. "My turn." He took position with the XM45, sighted briefly, and fired 3 rounds. His grouping matched Lyra's almost exactly. "Basic functionality seems comparable," he noted. "Lieutenant Reed, activate rainfall simulation." The chamber filled with heavy artificial rain. Lyra frowned as her weapon's display flickered slightly. Moisture always affected energy calibration. Still, when she fired, the weapon performed adequately, though one shot drifted slightly off-center. Miller's weapon showed no change in performance, all 3 shots landing precisely. "Interesting," he commented. "Next environment, please." The chamber temperature dropped rapidly, frost forming on surfaces. Lyra's weapon responded sluggishly, its power cell struggling in the extreme cold. Her shots still hit the target, but the grouping widened considerably. Miller fired again. His weapon functioned perfectly. "Energy cells are sensitive to temperature extremes," he observed neutrally. "Let's continue." Reed activated the electromagnetic pulse generator. Lyra's confidence faltered as her weapon immediately went offline, its sensitive circuitry overwhelmed by the interference. She began defensively. An increasingly common battlefield condition. Miller finished for her. He raised his weapon and fired 3 perfect shots. Purely mechanical action. No electronics to disrupt. Lyra's scales flushed with embarrassment. A specialized countermeasure designed specifically against advanced technology. Perhaps, Miller acknowledged. Final test. Dust storm. As fine sand particles filled the chamber, Lyra reluctantly attempted to fire. Her weapon sputtered, its precisely calibrated energy channels clogged with particulates. Only one weak bolt emerged, barely marking the target. Miller shouldered his rifle, firing 3 shots that landed with unwavering accuracy. The chamber cleared, and an uncomfortable silence fell. Lyra's assumptions about human weapon inferiority lay shattered before her. "Captain," she began, her voice less confident than before. Miller held up a hand. "This isn't about superiority, Lyra. It's about different solutions to the same problem." He placed his weapon down. "Would you like to see what else we've developed? I think you might find it educational." For the first time since her arrival, Lyra felt genuine respect growing for these humans and their approach to technology. "Yes," she said quietly. "I believe I would." After the initial tests, Captain Miller escorted Lyra to a larger testing range. Military vehicles had assembled in a semicircle, each carrying different weapon systems covered with tan canvas tarps. Lyra's scientific curiosity was now fully engaged, her previous condescension replaced with genuine interest. "What you've seen so far is just our standard infantry equipment," Miller explained as they walked. "Now I'd like to show you some of our specialized systems." Lieutenant Reed approached with a tablet. "Everything's ready, Captain. Command has authorized full demonstration protocol." Miller nodded. "Let's start with defensive countermeasures." At his signal, soldiers unveiled the first system, a compact device mounted on a tripod. It didn't look like a weapon to Lyra's eyes. "This is an EMP generator," Miller explained. "It creates a targeted electromagnetic pulse that disables electronic systems within its radius." Lyra frowned. "Similar to the environment you tested my weapon in." "Exactly. But this is directional and can be calibrated for different intensities." Miller gestured to a technician who activated the device. A low hum built up, then a nearly invisible pulse shot across the range, instantly disabling a row of electronic targets. Against an enemy using energy weapons or advanced targeting systems, Miller left the implication hanging. It would render them completely defenseless. Lyra finished quietly. Miller moved to the next station. "This is more offensive in nature." The soldiers revealed what appeared to be a large rifle mounted on a stabilizing platform. Its barrel was thicker than the previous weapons, with cooling elements wrapped around it. "Magnetic acceleration rifle," Miller said. "No chemical propellant. It uses electromagnetic fields to accelerate a metal projectile to extreme velocities." Lyra's eyes widened. "A railgun. But that's advanced technology." Miller smiled. "The principle is simple, even if the execution is complex." A soldier demonstrated, taking aim at a heavily armored target 500 meters downrange. The weapon made a distinctive whine before firing with a sharp crack. The projectile punched through the target's heavy plate like it was paper. "The kinetic energy is devastating," Miller explained. "No energy shield your people have developed could stop it. Physics simply doesn't allow it. The faster the projectile, the more energy it delivers on impact." Lyra watched in stunned silence as they moved to the next demonstration. "Sometimes subtlety is required," Miller continued, pointing to what looked like ordinary bullets arranged on a table. "These appear standard but contain specialized payloads. EMP rounds for disabling electronics, thermobaric for confined spaces, armor-piercing for hardened targets." He picked up one round. "This contains a nanotracer that can track targets for days. Completely mechanical. No electronic signature to detect." "Your specialization is extensive," Lyra admitted, examining the ammunition with new respect. They moved to another station where a soldier stood with what appeared to be a primitive bow and arrow. "This seems particularly archaic," Lyra couldn't help commenting. Miller smiled. "Carbon fiber compound bow. Silent, no heat signature, effective range of 100 meters in skilled hands. The arrows can carry various payloads, including communications jammers, for when absolute stealth is required." Lyra nodded, understanding dawning. "Exactly. No electronic signature, no propellant residue, virtually untraceable." The final demonstration was perhaps the most impressive. A vehicle rolled forward, unveiling a large cannon-like weapon. "This is our newest development," Miller said with evident pride. "A multi-phase weapon system that can fire conventional rounds, guided munitions, or switch to a directed energy mode for certain targets." "You've combined both approaches," Lyra observed, genuinely impressed. "We found there's rarely a single perfect solution to every combat situation," Miller explained. "Adaptability is our focus." At his signal, the weapon demonstrated each firing mode. The conventional round demolished a concrete bunker. The guided munition navigated a complex path to strike a moving target. The energy beam precisely cut through a line of targets without damaging the structures behind them. Lyra watched in silence, her earlier assumptions thoroughly dismantled. These weren't primitive weapons. They were highly specialized tools developed along a different technological path than her civilization had chosen. "Your people abandoned projectile weapons entirely?" Miller asked. "Centuries ago," Lyra confirmed. "We considered them obsolete." Miller nodded thoughtfully. "That's a dangerous assumption in warfare. Every technology has strengths and vulnerabilities." Lyra's analytical mind was racing, reassessing everything she'd been taught. "We may have overlooked significant tactical advantages by focusing exclusively on energy weapons." "Different paths, different solutions," Miller said simply. "We've learned to keep what works while developing new approaches." As they walked back toward the command center, Lyra felt a profound shift in her understanding. These humans weren't technologically primitive. They were pragmatic innovators who refused to abandon proven technologies simply because newer ones existed. "I believe I have much to learn from your people, Captain Miller," she admitted. In the command center, Lyra sat across from Captain Miller at a conference table. Her datapad lay before her, but she hadn't touched it for several minutes. The walls around them displayed various weapon schematics and performance graphs. Everything she had witnessed challenged her most fundamental assumptions about weapons technology. "Would you like some water?" Miller offered, noticing her contemplative silence. "Yes, thank you," Lyra replied, her scales shifting to a slightly deeper blue, a sign of deep thought among her people. As Miller poured water from a metal pitcher, Lyra gathered her thoughts. "Captain, I must admit that my initial assessment of human weapons technology was flawed." Miller smiled slightly. "Most first impressions are incomplete. That's why we study and learn. My civilization has followed a single technological path for so long that we stopped questioning it," Lyra explained. "Our weapons development focused exclusively on energy efficiency, power output, and range. All important factors," Miller acknowledged. "But we neglected versatility, reliability under adverse conditions, and resistance to countermeasures." Lyra took a sip of water. "We assumed that any advanced civilization would naturally abandon physical projectiles entirely." Lieutenant Reed entered the room carrying several cases, which she placed on the table. "The comparison models you requested, sir." "Thank you, Lieutenant." Miller opened the first case, revealing what appeared to be an antique firearm. "This is a Colt Model 1911 pistol, designed over a century ago, yet still functional today. Simple, reliable, effective." He opened another case containing a modern sidearm. "This is our current standard issue. More advanced materials, higher capacity, better ergonomics, but the basic operating principle remains unchanged." "Because it works," Lyra stated, understanding dawning. "Exactly. We improve what needs improving but don't discard proven technology without good reason. Miller leaned forward. If I may ask, what happens when your energy weapons run out of power? Lyra hesitated. They become inoperative until recharge. And how long does recharging take? Approximately 20 minutes for a standard power cell. Miller nodded thoughtfully. Our soldiers carry extra ammunition. A magazine change takes seconds. Lyra's gaze moved to the wall displays showing various battlefield environments. Dense jungles, Arctic wastelands, urban ruins, underwater facilities. In how many of these would our people's weapons face problems? We've been thinking of weapons as separate from their environments, she murmured. A critical oversight. Environment shapes technology, Miller agreed. Desert conditions require different solutions than Arctic warfare. Sergeant Tanner entered with another case, this one larger and heavily secured. Miller entered a code to unlock it. This is classified technology, he explained as the case opened. A hybrid system we're developing. Inside lay what appeared to be a rifle, but unlike any Lyra had seen. Its components seemed to blend organic materials with advanced composites and metallic elements. This weapon adapts to changing conditions automatically, Miller explained. It can switch between chemical propellant, electronic acceleration, or compressed air depending on environmental factors. Lyra leaned closer, professional fascination overcoming her earlier prejudices. The flexibility is remarkable. We learned from our earlier conflicts that specialization creates vulnerability, Miller said. Our enemies would identify weaknesses in our systems and exploit them. So we began developing technologies that could adapt. A holographic display activated, showing the weapon functioning in various extreme environments. Lyra watched as it maintained effectiveness underwater, in vacuum conditions, during electromagnetic storms, and in extreme temperatures. Your approach isn't primitive at all, Lyra finally admitted. It's pragmatic, adaptable. Miller nodded. We've found that the most dangerous assumption in warfare is believing there's only one correct path of development. Lyra's scales shifted to a lighter shade as understanding solidified. My people have become vulnerable through our specialization. We abandoned projectile weapons so completely that we've even lost the knowledge to counter them effectively. Technological diversity is a strategic advantage, Miller confirmed. Each approach has strengths and weaknesses. The wise strategy is maintaining multiple options. Lyra stood and walked to the large viewport overlooking the testing grounds. Soldiers continued their drills, moving with practiced efficiency. Her perception had shifted completely. Where she once saw primitive beings clinging to outdated technology, she now recognized innovative adaptability. Captain Miller, she said quietly, I believe my report to my superiors will differ significantly from what they expected. How so? Miller asked. Lyra turned, her expression solemn. I need to tell them that we have much to learn from humans, and that perhaps our technological superiority isn't as absolute as we believed. The military base's conference room had been converted into a temporary cultural exchange center. Display tables lined the walls, each showcasing different aspects of human weapons technology. Lyra moved methodically between them, recording detailed observations on her datapad. Occasionally, her scales would shift to bright purple, a sign of excitement her species displayed when making important discoveries. Captain Miller watched from a respectful distance, allowing her space to process everything. The past 2 days had been intense for the alien visitor, filled with demonstrations that systematically dismantled her preconceptions about human military technology. Are you ready for the final portion of our exchange? Miller asked, approaching after Lyra completed her examination of a disassembled rifle. Yes, Lyra replied, her voice carrying new respect. Though I confess I'm still processing much of what I've learned. Miller guided her toward a door at the rear of the room. This next section might be the most important. It's about our philosophy of technological development. They entered a smaller room where Lieutenant Reed waited with several historical artifacts displayed under protective cases. Each represented different eras of human warfare. What you're seeing is the evolution of our approach, Miller explained. Not just the technology itself, but our thinking about it. Lyra examined each item with growing interest. A stone arrowhead, an ancient sword, a musket ball, a modern bullet, a circuit board from a guided missile. You've preserved these primitive weapons, she observed, as historical curiosities. Reed shook her head. As learning tools, each represents a solution to problems faced in its time. Understanding them helps us develop better solutions for tomorrow. Miller pointed to a display showing the cross-section of a modern multi-purpose round. We don't abandon old technologies. We build upon them. This ammunition uses principles discovered hundreds of years ago, combined with materials developed last year. My people would have replaced everything with energy weapons, Lyra admitted, starting fresh with each technological leap. And in doing so, might lose valuable knowledge, Miller suggested gently. Sergeant Tanner entered, carrying a wooden box. The demonstration is ready, sir. They moved to a table where Tanner carefully opened the box to reveal what appeared to be simple mechanical devices. No electronics, no power sources. These are what we call contingency weapons, Miller explained, designed to function when all else fails. Lyra picked up what looked like a small crossbow made from composite materials. No electronic components at all. Correct. It can be assembled from stored components in under 30 seconds. Effective range of 50 meters. Silent operation. No detectable signature. Lyra's scales rippled with understanding. For when advanced technology is compromised. Exactly, Miller confirmed. We have a saying, 2 is 1, and 1 is none. It means always have a backup. While my people pursued a single technological path to perfection, Lyra began. We maintained multiple paths simultaneously, Miller finished. Not because we couldn't master energy weapons, but because we recognized the strategic vulnerability of relying on a single approach. Tanner demonstrated a mechanical trap that could be constructed from simple materials, but would effectively disable even advanced armored vehicles. Reed showed communication systems that used no electricity but could transmit messages over considerable distances. Redundancy is security, Miller summarized. Each backup system creates flexibility that a specialist force lacks. Lyra set down the device she was examining, her expression solemn. My civilization has created a critical vulnerability for ourselves. If our energy weapons were somehow neutralized, you'd have no fallback position. Miller nodded understanding. But that can be remedied with knowledge exchange. The group moved to a final display, a holographic representation of Earth's military history. It showed not linear progression but branching evolution, with multiple technologies developing simultaneously, sometimes converging, sometimes diverging. This is perhaps our greatest strength, Miller said. We never fully abandon working technology. We improve it, adapt it, combine it with new discoveries. Lyra studied the display intently, a technological ecosystem rather than a single path. Precisely. In nature, specialized species are vulnerable to environmental changes. The same applies to military technology. As they exited the room, Lyra paused. Captain Miller, would your government consider a formal exchange program? My people have much to teach about energy weapons, but clearly much to learn about technological diversity. Miller smiled. I believe that could be arranged. Both our civilizations would benefit. Indeed, Lyra agreed, her scales now a calm blue of certainty. My superiors must understand that what we perceived as primitive stubbornness is actually sophisticated strategic thinking. You haven't clung to outdated technology. You've maintained technological diversity as a strength. Different paths to the same goal, Miller offered. Yes, Lyra nodded. And perhaps together, we can create even better paths forward. Lyra sat in her ship's command chair, surrounded by holographic displays filled with the data she had collected. Outside the viewport, Earth rotated slowly, its blue oceans and white clouds forming patterns that seemed almost artistic from this distance. She had spent a week at the human military facility, far longer than her initial mission parameters had specified. Her report to the High Council was nearly complete. It would, she knew, cause significant controversy among her people. The neat, orderly technological progression that formed the backbone of her civilization's military doctrine was about to be challenged by her findings. "Final data compilation complete," announced the ship's eye, "ready for transmission to the Commonwealth Central Hub." Lyra hesitated, her clawed finger hovering over the send command. Once submitted, her report would be distributed to the highest military and scientific authorities of her civilization. There would be no taking it back. Proceed with transmission, she finally decided. As the ship's communication array directed the encrypted data toward the distant relay station, Lyra replayed the final conversation with Captain Miller in her mind. "Your people will resist these ideas," Miller had said as they stood beside her ship on her final day. "New thinking always faces opposition. Some will dismiss my findings," Lyra had agreed. "They'll claim I've been charmed by primitive beings who compensate for technological inadequacy with clever justifications." Miller had smiled at that. "And what will you tell them?" "The truth," Lyra had replied firmly. "That humanity's approach isn't primitive at all. It's prudently diverse. That specialization creates vulnerability. That maintaining multiple technological paths simultaneously provides strategic advantages we've overlooked." The memory faded as the ship confirmed successful transmission. Her report would take 3 days to reach Commonwealth space. In the meantime, she had one more task to complete. Lyra activated the recording system and began her personal log, speaking clearly for posterity. Final mission summary. Earth military assessment. What began as a routine observation of what we believe to be an underdeveloped species has transformed my understanding of technological progression itself. The humans continue to develop and maintain what we would consider obsolete weapons technology, not from inability to advance, but from strategic wisdom. Their approach maintains effectiveness across all environments and situations, resistant to countermeasures that would render specialized systems useless. I have documented 57 distinct advantages of projectile weapons over energy-based systems in various combat scenarios. I have also identified 34 critical vulnerabilities in Commonwealth standard military equipment that could be exploited by human weapons technology. My primary recommendation is immediate establishment of a joint research program. The humans' diverse technological approach combined with our advanced energy systems could create military technology superior to either alone. Most importantly, I must emphasize that our assessment of humanity as a developing species requires immediate revision. Their technological path differs from ours not because they lag behind, but because they recognized weaknesses in specialization that we have ignored. In conclusion, I believe the Commonwealth's military doctrine requires significant reconsideration. Our single-path approach has created strategic vulnerabilities that could prove catastrophic if exploited by a technologically diverse opponent. Lyra ended the recording and gazed once more at the planet below. The humans had surprised her in ways she never expected. Their primitive weapons had proven sophisticated in their simplicity, reliable in their operation, and devastatingly effective in the right circumstances. A message notification appeared on her console. It was from Captain Miller. "Safe journey, Lyra. Remember that different paths can lead to the same destination. We look forward to learning from your people as much as sharing what we know. The stars have room for many approaches." Lyra smiled, her scales shifting to warm gold tones of optimism. She composed a brief reply. "Thank you, Captain. I believe my report will open a new chapter in relations between our civilizations. Your primitive weapons have taught me that true advancement comes not from abandoning the old, but from building upon it while exploring the new. Different paths indeed. Perhaps together we can forge even better ones." As her ship moved away from Earth orbit and prepared for the jump to faster-than-light travel, Lyra felt a profound sense of accomplishment. She had arrived expecting to document primitive technology. She was leaving with understanding that would transform her civilization's approach to warfare and perhaps technology itself. Sometimes, she reflected, the greatest discoveries come from questioning what everyone believes to be obvious. The humans had never stopped questioning, never committed fully to a single approach, and in that diversity, they had found strength her people had forgotten.